911.
Ma'am, I killed my boyfriend in self-defense.
Okay, hold on. What did you kill him with?
A loaded gun in the house because he was twitching and I knew he was going to die anyway and he was making funny noises. I shot him a couple more times just to kill him because I knew he would have been...
I'm sorry, you said you shot him a couple more times after that?
Yeah.
How many times did you shoot him total?
I don't know.
Okay.
Some places feel safe. They're built with strong walls and filled with the quiet hum of ambition. This was Ryan Poston's home, a space he had earned a symbol of a life meticulously constructed brick by brick, success by success. He was 29 years old, a brilliant attorney with a future so bright it was blinding. Friends, family, a thriving career, the respect of his community. He had everything a person could reasonably ask for, and he was just getting started. His home was a place of peace, until one night that peace was irrevocably shattered. The 911 call came in on the evening of October 12, 2012. There was no terror in the voice on the other end of the line, no frantic desperation, just a chilling, almost unnerving calm. In that upscale condo, the symbol of his bright future, Ryan Poston, was shot 6 times. The woman who pulled the trigger was his 21-year-old girlfriend, Shana Grice, a gifted honors graduate student with an IQ that placed her comfortably in the genius category. This isn't a simple story of a relationship gone wrong. It's a story about the razor-thin line between love and obsession, between brilliance and madness. It's a psychological puzzle that forces us to ask an unsettling question. Was this a desperate act of self-defense against a man who pushed her to the brink? Or was it the cold, calculated execution? Hello everyone and welcome back. Today's story is a particularly unsettling one. It has all the elements of a Hollywood thriller: a handsome, successful lawyer, a beautiful, intelligent young woman, and a romance that spirals into a horrifying tragedy. But this is all too real. So get comfortable and let's dive into the labyrinth of the relationship between Ryan Poston and Shana Grice. To understand the explosion, you first have to understand the components. Let's start with Ryan. Ryan Carter Poston was the man who had checked every box. Born and raised in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky, he was driven from a young age. He wasn't just smart, he was charismatic and hardworking. He sailed through law school at Northern Kentucky University and by 29 had established himself as a sought-after attorney in Highland Heights, specializing in personal injury law. He was the kind of guy people were naturally drawn to, charming, witty, and with a smile that could disarm a hostile witness. Friends described him as loyal, generous, the anchor of their group. If you were in trouble, Ryan was the first person you'd call. He was the responsible one, the planner, the one who remembered birthdays and organized get-togethers. In a world of uncertainty, Ryan Poston was a sure thing. His life was a straight line heading directly towards success. And then there was Shana. Shana Grice was in many ways Ryan's intellectual equal, if not superior. At just 21, she was already a graduate student in school counseling at the University of Kentucky, having earned her bachelor's degree in psychology with honors from the same institution. She was whip-smart, academically decorated, and exceptionally proud of her intellect. It was a core part of her identity. To her friends, she was ambitious, funny, and fiercely intense. There was nothing casual about Shana. When she was interested in something, she was all in. When she loved hard. She saw herself as the protagonist in a grand story, a young woman who was destined for a life less ordinary. On the surface, they were a power couple in the making, the successful lawyer and the brilliant psychologist. A match made in the modern world, brought together as so many are by social media. Their story began in the spring of 2011 with a simple friend request on Facebook. Ryan was captivated by Shana's photos. She was youthful, striking, and she projected an aura of sharp intellectual confidence. Shana, in turn, was dazzled by Ryan's profile. He wasn't just another guy from a college town. He was an accomplished man, 8 years her senior. His profile was a gallery of success, a career, financial stability, a life she aspired to. He was the complete package. The initial connection was electric. Their messages weren't just simple flirting. They were filled with clever banter debates about psychology and law and a shared ambitious worldview. He was impressed by her mind, her quick wit, and her seemingly endless curiosity. She in turn was infatuated with his status and the life he had built. It felt like the perfect modern romance. For Ryan, who was looking for a serious, stable relationship after a string of casual dates, Shana seemed like a refreshing change. She was smart-driven and seemed to adore him completely. Her intensity felt like passion. For Shana, dating Ryan was like winning a prize. He was her trophy, tangible proof of her own value and desirability. She told her friends with absolute certainty that she had finally found the man she was going to marry. The relationship moved at lightning speed. Within weeks, they were inseparable. Shana practically moved into his condo. Her adoration was a constant, flattering presence in his life. But what looked like passionate, all-consuming love from the outside was already beginning to curdle into something far more sinister. The first red flags in a toxic relationship often don't look like flags at all. They look like care. They look like passion. They look like love. Shana's affection for Ryan wasn't just affection. It was a siege. It started with the texts, not just a few dozen a day, but hundreds. A relentless, unending stream of consciousness that demanded his constant attention. If Ryan was in a meeting with a client, his phone would vibrate incessantly on the table. If he was at a deposition, he'd return to find 50 missed messages. If he was out with friends for a couple of hours, a barrage of texts would escalate from, "I love you, thinking of you," to "Where are you? Who are you with?" And finally to "Why are you doing this to me? Are you ignoring me?" It was a constant digital leash, a tool to ensure that even when they were apart, she was never out of his mind. One of Ryan's friends, Tom, later recalled, "You couldn't have a conversation with him for more than 5 minutes without his phone buzzing with a text from her. At first we'd joke about it like, 'Wow, she's really into you.' But after a while it wasn't funny anymore. You could see the life draining out of him. He'd glance at his phone with this look of dread. It was like he was always on call. This wasn't just about communication. It was about control. Shana's love had a conditioned totality. She needed to occupy every corner of Ryan's life, every thought in his head. She would show up unannounced at his law office claiming she was just in the area and wanted to surprise him for lunch. She would get quiet and cold if he made plans with his friends without consulting her first, making him feel guilty for wanting a life outside of her. His hobbies, his friendships, his family, they weren't parts of his life she wanted to join. They were competition she needed to eliminate. She saw his independent life not as a healthy part of who he was, but as a threat to her position at the center of his universe. And behind the curtain of their private life, Shana's obsession was taking on a darker tone. She was performing for her friends, painting a picture of a perfect romance, while simultaneously revealing her terrifying possessiveness in what she passed off as dark humor. In one text, she would brag, "Ryan is perfect, he's so successful and everyone loves him. I'm the luckiest girl in the world." But in another moment, the mask would slip. She once texted a friend, "I gave him a gun for Christmas. It's kind of ironic if something ever happens to him, it'll be with the gun I gave him. LOL." The LOL was a shield, a way to make light of the chilling thought she had just written. Another time, after a minor argument about his wish for plastic surgery, she wrote to a friend, "When he's gone, I'm going to get a nose job with the money." These weren't just jokes, they were rehearsals. They were tests pushing the boundaries of what she could get away with saying. And then the most chilling message of all, a sentence that served as a direct prophecy of the tragedy to come, a sentence that perfectly encapsulated her entire worldview on love and ownership. "If I can't have him, no one can." It's easy to look back now and see these messages for what they were, not jokes but warnings. They were glimpses into a mind that did not process rejection as a normal part of life, but as an intolerable wound to her ego. A narcissistic injury so profound that it demanded a disproportionate response. A wound that in her mind could only be healed with absolute final control. For Ryan, the dream had become a nightmare. The woman who had once seemed so vibrant and loving was now a source of constant gnawing anxiety. He was walking on eggshells in his own home. Every word had to be weighed, every action considered for how it might be interpreted or misinterpreted by her. He spent his days trying to manage her moods, to de-escalate her jealousy, to carve out a single moment of peace for himself. The relationship was no longer a source of joy. It was a second, exhausting job. He tried to break up with her many times, but each attempt was met with a calculated storm of psychological manipulation. Shana, the brilliant psychology student, knew exactly which buttons to push. First would come the tears, the heartbreaking pleas, the desperate promises to change. "I'll be better," she'd cry. "I know I'm too much, but it's only because I love you so much." When that didn't work, she would pivot to threats not against him, but against herself. She would threaten self-harm, talking vaguely about how she couldn't live without him, placing the entire burden of her well-being squarely on his shoulders. He was a good person, a caring person by nature, and the thought of her getting hurt because of him was a prison he couldn't escape. He was trapped by his own conscience. His friends and family saw the change in him. The vibrant, confident man was becoming withdrawn, weary, and a shadow of his former self. His stepfather, Peter, tried to talk to him. He told me he felt trapped. Peter would later testify, his voice heavy with the memory. He said, "This girl is crazy, but I don't know how to get away from her without something terrible happening." He was scared. Not for himself, but for her and for what she might do. Ryan felt cornered, but he hadn't given up. He was a lawyer. He was a problem solver. He believed there had to be a logical, peaceful way out of this emotional maze. His solution was to try and move on, to create distance, to show Shana and maybe himself that his life could exist without her. And that's when Audrey Bolte entered the picture. Audrey Bolte was in many ways Shana's opposite. She was the reigning Miss Ohio USA, a woman comfortable in the spotlight, poised, self-assured yet down to earth. There was no drama, no constant need for validation. Ryan and Audrey had gone on a few dates. The connection was light, easy, and most importantly, normal. For the first time, Ryan felt like he could breathe again. They even went to a shooting range with a group of friends, a clear sign that Ryan was finally stepping into a new chapter of his life. But tragically, the night he had scheduled to meet Audrey would become the night that exposed Shana's obsession and the fragility of her ego. It was October 12, 2012, the night everything changed. But he underestimated the depths of Shana's obsession. For her, Audrey wasn't just a new girlfriend. She was a declaration of war, a public rejection. Shana's ego, the very core of her identity, had been shattered. She began stalking Audrey online, dissecting her photos, comparing herself to this new rival. To her friends, she seethed with a toxic mix of jealousy and condescension, calling the beauty queen Miss Ohio with dripping sarcasm. The existence of Audrey Bolte solidified a terrifying resolve in Shana's mind. Ryan Poston had made his choice, and if he wouldn't choose her, she would make a choice for him, a final, irreversible one. The stage was set for the last act. Friday, October 12th, 2012. It was a crisp, clear autumn night in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky, a night that felt full of possibility. For Ryan Poston, it was going to be a turning point. He had a date scheduled with Audrey Bolte. This wasn't just another casual outing. This was him choosing his future, choosing peace over paranoia, choosing a life free from the suffocating, all-consuming chaos that had become his relationship with Shana Hubers. He had spent the day preparing for the conversation he knew had to happen. He had to be firm. He had to be absolute. This time, the manipulation, the tears, the threats, none of it could work. He had to finally definitively cut the cord. But in the strange, twisted logic of obsession, Shana knew this too. She didn't need an invitation to his condo. She needed an excuse. And she arrived with one that was perfectly mundane and utterly disarming. She needed to borrow a few textbooks she'd left behind. It was a routine domestic request, one that masked the nuclear tension simmering beneath the surface. Ryan was caught off guard, but he let her in. This was it, the final, unavoidable confrontation, as she moved around his sanctuary collecting her props. The real conversation began. Ryan was reportedly resolute. He told her in no uncertain terms that it was over. Not, "We need a break," not, "Let's talk later," but finished. He was moving on with Audrey. He was choosing happiness. For Shana, this final rejection wasn't just heartbreak. It was an annihilation of her constructed reality. It wasn't just that he preferred someone else. It was that he was publicly and undeniably choosing someone he deemed inferior. Miss Ohio, a woman whose entire value in Shana's genius-level estimation rested on external beauty rather than internal intellect. It was an insult to her pride, an injury to her narcissism that she simply could not bear. The conversation escalated instantly. The calm adult breakup dissolved into a desperate, hateful scream fest. Shana, losing her last grip on control, became physically aggressive. Ryan, a large man, was trying to manage the situation, trying to usher her out of his home without causing a scene that might bring the neighbors. And then Shana saw her opportunity. In the condo, sitting on a bedside table, was a .40 caliber Glock handgun. It was Ryan's weapon, one he had purchased for his own self-defense in a time when he had feared a random threat. But with Shana, the threat was never random. Shana snatched the weapon. Ryan, seeing his life flash before him, reacted instantly, a moment of pure panicked self-preservation. A struggle ensued, a desperate tug-of-war for the gun ending, not with Ryan taking back control, but with a horrifying, deafening sound that tore through the quiet evening. The first shot. That first bullet struck Ryan Poston's torso. It was the decisive blow, the one that broke the struggle and sent the 29-year-old attorney collapsing to the floor of his living room, his sanctuary now a scene of sudden violent chaos. According to Shana's later claims, this was the moment of self-defense. This was the moment she was terrified, the moment the attack stopped, but the forensic evidence and Shana's own chilling actions that followed told a profoundly different story. Ryan was down, completely vulnerable. The danger, whatever it had been, was over. Someone acting in true self-defense would have stopped. They would have dropped the weapon and called for help. But Shana Hubers didn't. She stood over the man who had dared to walk away from her, calm, steady, and cold. Then she pulled the trigger again, and again, 6 shots in total, each one echoing through the room like punctuation marks in a twisted monologue, a mixture of heartbreak, pride, and fury. When investigators examined the scene later, they saw not chaos, but precision. Not panic, but purpose. Among the 6 shots, one was delivered at dangerously close range, precise, calculated, and deliberate. That single moment transformed the tragedy into something far colder, something that felt almost rehearsed. This wasn't panic, this was punctuation. When investigators later asked her why she did it, why she chose such a shocking final gesture, Shana responded with what would become the most haunting line of the entire case, a line that stripped away any illusion of fear or self-defense, exposing instead a chilling blend of vanity and revenge. A nose job, a final sarcastic, hateful gift to the man who had dared to see beyond her, a final act of utter dominance over his very identity. The house was silent once more, except for the faint echo of ringing in Shana's ears and the heavy rhythm of her own heartbeat. But the night was far from over. Shana did not immediately call 911. She had time. She had about 90 minutes, in fact, between the time the first shot was fired and the time she finally picked up the phone. This gap of time became one of the prosecution's most powerful tools. What was she doing during those 90 minutes? She later testified that she was in a state of shock. But what police discovered was a series of calculating actions. She contacted her mother, Michelle Hubers. The exact content of that conversation is unknown, but Shana clearly received advice because what followed was a carefully constructed narrative. Finally, Shana called the police, but her tone was the most unsettling part of all. It wasn't the voice of a hysterical victim who had just survived a life-or-death struggle. It was the voice of a young woman reporting an inconvenience, a bureaucratic necessity. The voice was almost flat, unnervingly calm, deliberate. She wasn't asking for help. She was stating a fact, one that had already been carefully arranged in her mind. She immediately launched into a rehearsed self-defense story. He was trying to throw her out. He was threatening her. It was him or her. It was the defense strategy delivered to the dispatcher before the patrol cars had even arrived. When officers entered the condo, the scene was exactly as Shana had described. Ryan Poston was no longer responsive. Shana Hubers appeared composed, and the weapon rested nearby. She was taken to the Highland Heights Police Department for questioning, and it was there inside that interrogation room that the mask of the frightened victim began to slip away entirely. If Shana Hubers expected sympathy or immediate release, she was about to be sorely disappointed. The police immediately noted the discrepancy between her calm demeanor and the severity of the crime she had just confessed to. She was alone in a small, windowless interrogation room, a standard setting designed to put pressure on a suspect. But for Shana, it seemed to be a stage. The footage from that night became the most damaging and unforgettable piece of evidence in the trials that would follow. The cameras captured not a woman grieving or reeling from trauma, but a woman in a strange, manic state. She was performing. This wasn't shock. This was a theatrical performance of calculated insanity. In the hours she spent waiting for detectives to return, Shana Hubers didn't sit still. She danced. She did bizarre, almost balletic pirouettes and swayed around the small room. She started singing first what sounded like pop songs. Then, with an eerie, high-pitched reverence, she sang the hymn, Amazing Grace. It was a chilling juxtaposition, the voice of salvation following the act of execution. She replayed the entire incident out loud, describing what had happened in a disturbingly casual tone. At moments, her words drifted between reflection and justification, mixing remorse with pride in a way that felt almost rehearsed. She mentioned the gift she had once given him, the same one now at the center of the tragedy, and alluded to what she had done with it, uncertain yet oddly composed. Then, as if detached from reality, she let out a nervous laugh, fixed her hair, and struck a pose for the camera, tilting her head and pulling her arms back as though taking a selfie. This is perhaps the most unsettling part of the whole case. It's not the murder itself, but the utter absolute lack of human emotion afterwards. Her IQ was high enough to dissect trauma in others, but she couldn't even convincingly fake it herself. It was the moment her genius betrayed her, revealing a shocking chasm where empathy should have been. When the detectives did speak to her, the self-pitying victim narrative was quickly overtaken by her true nature. Arrogant, self-aggrandizing, and utterly devoid of empathy for the man she had just murdered. I'm quoting her words almost exactly as she said them. He was a lawyer and he was perfect on paper. Everyone loved him. But I was just so much better than him. Honestly, I was too good for him. That phrase, I was too good for him, became the three-word summary of the prosecution's entire case. It wasn't about fear. It was about wounded pride. It was about her brilliant mind being rejected by a man she deemed beneath her. She spent hours detailing the relationship, not with sadness, but with a detached, analytical, almost academic tone, critiquing Ryan's personality, his career choices, and his friends. In her mind, the only tragedy was that she, the protagonist, had been inconvenienced by the need to dispose of a character she no longer needed. The prosecution would argue that her dancing and singing were acts of triumph, a celebration of having finally irreversibly won the power struggle. Shana's theatrical performance in the interrogation room was devastating, but the physical and digital evidence the police gathered was the undeniable truth that crushed her self-defense story. First, the autopsy report. The examination of Ryan Poston's body told a clear, cold story of execution. Ryan was shot 6 times. Significantly, the trajectory of the bullets, particularly the ones that entered his torso and back, was inconsistent with a struggle where both people were standing upright. Detectives deduced and medical examiners confirmed that Ryan was shot multiple times as he lay slumped or already collapsed on the floor. These were not shots fired in the heat of a struggle. These were finishing shots designed to ensure death. The most damning detail remained the shot to his face, not a necessary component of self-defense, but a calculated act of cruelty that spoke volumes about her hatred and motive. Second, the digital trail. Shana Hubers was a highly modern killer, and her crime was documented in agonizing detail by her own constant communications. Police seized her phone and downloaded the thousands upon thousands of messages she had sent over the course of the relationship. If I can't have him, no one can. Her own words, captured forever in the cold storage of a server, revealed a clear, premeditated motive, narcissistic rage, and possessive control. The text messages didn't just outline a toxic relationship, they built a direct, undeniable bridge between her hatred of rejection and the violence of her actions. The self-defense claim collapsed under the sheer weight of the digital evidence she had created herself. The legal battle over Ryan Poston's life and fate was long, emotionally exhausting, and ultimately required 2 full trials to reach a final verdict. In 2015, the Commonwealth of Kentucky put Shana Hubers on trial for murder. The prosecution, led by Michelle Snodgrass, built a masterful case. Their theme was clear. Shana was not a victim, but an intellectual who had planned an execution after her ego was wounded. They leveraged her own words against her, playing the chilling 911 audio and the full bizarre interrogation video for the jury. Her singing and dancing became the image of a cold-hearted killer celebrating her victory. The defense, on the other hand, worked tirelessly to paint Ryan Poston as the abuser. They presented testimony suggesting the relationship was volatile, that Ryan was physically and emotionally abusive, and that on the night of October 12th, Shana, a young woman cornered and terrified, acted in a moment of pure, blinding fear. They tried to frame the 6 shots as an overkill defense, a sign of panic and trauma, not malice. But the 6 bullets were too much for the defense to overcome. The jury listened to the evidence, weighed the texts against the testimony of abuse, and after 5 hours of deliberation returned with a verdict: guilty of murder. Shana Hubers was sentenced to 40 years in prison, a sentence that seemed to bring a final, hard-earned measure of justice to the Poston family. But the story wasn't over. In a dramatic legal twist that shocked the courtroom, the 2015 conviction was vacated, overturned in 2016. The reason? The discovery that one of the jurors from the first trial had been a convicted felon. This administrative error meant the entire process was compromised, and Shana Hubers was granted a brand new trial. She was released on bond and allowed to live with her family while awaiting the second attempt at justice. Imagine the pain of the Poston family. They had finally closed the book on this nightmare, only to have the system force them to relive every gruesome detail, every chilling word all over again. It speaks to the resilience needed to seek justice. The second trial began in 2018. The core facts remained unchanged, but the prosecution refined its argument, focusing even more sharply on the psychological analysis of narcissism and control. The defense again relied heavily on the narrative of an emotionally battered woman. This time, the prosecutors had learned from the first trial, delivering an even more impactful presentation of Shana's controlling texts. They ensured the jury understood that her behavior before the shooting, the stalking, the manipulation, the constant threats, was the true prologue to the violence, making the self-defense claim impossible to believe. In April 2018, the second jury delivered the same inevitable conclusion: guilty. This time, the sentencing was slightly different, but equally definitive. Shana Hubers was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 20 years. This means her first opportunity for release will not be until 2032. The case of Shana Hubers and Ryan Poston is a haunting testament to the darkness that can lurk behind a beautiful smile and a brilliant mind. It's a tragic study in narcissistic injury, the profound psychological wound that occurs when a narcissist is rejected or challenged, leading to an over-the-top aggressive response designed to eliminate the source of the pain. For Shana, rejection was not an acceptable outcome. It was an existential threat. And the only way to reassert her total control was to end his life. We started this story by talking about the walls of Ryan's home, built with ambition and filled with the promise of a bright future. Those walls couldn't protect him from the woman who saw him not as a partner, but as a possession. Thank you all for taking this deep dive with me today. Let me know your thoughts on the psychology behind this case. Do you believe Shana was driven by pure narcissism, or was there more to her defense's claims of abuse? Let's keep the conversation going in the comments below. With the final verdict delivered and Shana Hubers sentenced to life behind bars, the legal chapter of this tragic story is closed. But the human element, the psychological terror, the social dynamics, and the critical lessons must be analyzed and understood to honor Ryan Poston's memory. We must stop asking what happened and start asking why we didn't see it coming. I just want to say this: take these warnings seriously. Emotional blackmail is when someone uses threats, even of self-harm, to keep you from leaving or to make you obey. That's not love, it's manipulation. Then comes possessiveness and isolation. Constant phone checks, demands to know your every move, jealousy toward friends and family, and slowly cutting you off from support. Watch for boundary violations too. If they ignore your no or cross your limits, they'll ignore bigger ones later. And finally, beware of extreme mood swings when love turns to hatred in seconds over the smallest thing. That's not passion, that's control. Ryan Poston was by all accounts a decent, kind man who kept trying to be nice, kept trying to find a peaceful solution right up until the last moment. His compassion was weaponized against him. The ultimate lesson here is stark and simple. When dealing with irrational, controlling, or narcissistic behavior, your primary duty is to yourself. Don't wait for permission. Don't worry about being mean. Don't believe you can fix them. If you or someone you know is in a controlling relationship, whether you are a man or a woman, please, I urge you, seek help. Talk to someone. Create a safe exit plan. Your life is not a stage for someone else's toxic obsession. Your well-being is not negotiable. You have the right to feel safe, respected, and free. Honor yourself, trust your gut, and have the profound courage to walk away from anything that threatens your peace, your freedom, or your life. What are your thoughts on how the legal system handles digital evidence in stalking cases? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you all for joining me today. Be safe, and I'll see you in the next one.